Okay, good afternoon, everybody. I hope you're all enjoying DevOps as much as I am. Apparently, I heard on the radio today is Usability Day. Not sure if this talk entirely fits that, but still. Okay, so I'm going to talk to you about converting between transfer and domain objects and a way to make it easier for you to do so. So let's start with the beginning. What is a transfer object, or what do I consider a transfer object in this context? It's easy. That's a class with only getters and setters, like the example given here. I would strongly recommend using Project Lombok to make sure that you don't actually have to write the getters and setters themselves. So if you don't know Project Lombok, have a look at it. That actually adds the getters and setters for you at compile time, and the @data annotation at the top of the class indicates to Lombok that the getters and setters need to be generated. @data will also generate a toString and an equals for you, but yeah. Why would you use transfer objects? Basically, it allows you to decouple your API and your domain model. This can be practical, for example, in the case of Hibernate, and to make sure that you don't literally surface your domain model to the client, which can be very practical if at some point you want to change your domain model. You're not obliged to change your API as well. And in general, you can use this for all application boundaries, also for doing incoming, or if you're doing calls to get information from other services, or for example, when communicating with your user interface, if you're using some kind of web framework to cross the transaction boundaries. Right, so how would you normally do this? By writing stupid boilerplate code, which basically copies the values from your transfer object to your domain object, or vice versa. But unfortunately, it is not always that easy, because you have to take, you have to consider null checks. For linked objects, you may want to do a domain lookup, or you may not want to do that. You may need to do type conversions, like in the examples I showed. My transfer object had a string as a gender, while it was an enumeration in my domain model. Still, it is all very straightforward code. It is all boilerplate, well, more or less. As an example, in a project where we checked all this for the Flemish government, it's a big Java project with where everything is surfaced through a REST API, with all the REST calls using transfer objects. At the time that we actually converted it to JTransfo, almost 10% of the code was custom code doing conversions between transfer objects and domain objects. As some extra bonuses of all this custom code, there was various inconsistent behavior, sometimes doing domain lookups, sometimes not doing domain lookups, and it was for the developers quite tedious code to write. You required a lot of time to do it. It required a lot of time to do all the tests. You were mostly cut and pasting everything, but still, because you're hardly thinking while doing so, making and fixing mistakes along the way. So, not nice work, definitely not challenging work, not the fun work to do. Right, so, as a solution, I propose that you automate the conversion between your transfer objects and your domain objects. There are, as far as I know, 2 libraries which allow you to do that. The other one is Dozer, which I'm not going to discuss. But JTransfo is also an option. Right, so first some of the features of JTransfo. So JTransfo is supposed to be easy to use. Now, obviously, I will let you be the judge of that, and you will see that in later slides. It is entirely annotation-based. So at the time when I started writing JTransfo, DOSA, for example, did not allow annotations to be used, and definitely not with the kind of features that was available in the initial version of JTransfo. To make it easy to integrate in other projects, JTransfo has absolutely no dependencies. It allows you to define as many transfer objects as you want for each domain object. And there is an extra bonus which allows you to consider, well, security or state of your objects when doing the conversion. We'll see an example of that later. There are some integrations. So JTransfo has extra modules which allow integration to Spring Framework and to JodaTime. And it obviously works well with Project Lombok, as I mentioned earlier. I would really recommend using that. And it is thoroughly tested using a Hibernate backend, so that all works well as... Right. So let's see what it all looks like. So, conversion in JTransfo is quite easy. Once you get a JTransfo instance, which if you're using... where's my dot? Oh. Well, if you're using the plain version without Spring integration, you would just still say, well, get a new copy of JTransfo. It's recommended to have only one JTransfo instance in your application, because that will make it do caching quite effectively. If you're using Spring, then just inject it or auto-wire it or whatever. So basically what you do is you can convert an object, so you use a convert-to call to convert an object to the class, and you tell it the class that it needs to be converted to. The system expects that one of the two is a transfer object and the other one is a domain object. Which one, that's up to you to decide. That just determines the way that it copies. You can also, and that's a second example, you can also convert directly into an existing object, so that it will basically override fields which are already there. And there is a convenience method that in case you have a list of objects that you can just convert the entire list. Right. So what does your transfer object look like? In your transfer object, you will add an annotation to indicate what the domain class is that that transfer object needs to be mapped to. There are two ways to actually specify that class. You can either specify it by name, which makes sure that the domain objects can be in a different module without requiring module dependencies between the two, or you can say what the class name is, which makes it easier to refactor. And then basically, JTransfo assumes that all your fields need to be mapped to the other object, and you can either indicate that this is not the case using the not mapped annotation at the bottom, or you can add some extra indications to JTransfo to say how it needs to map that field. For example, mapping it for the top one to a linked object in the domain object, or making sure that the field is read-only, making sure that you can actually copy it from the domain object to the transfer object, but not the reverse. So one of the added benefits of using JTransfo is that it has some extra features related to what could be called security, or considering state when the copying needs to be done. Basically, when converting the object, you can add tags to indicate the state or that the system is in. That can be an indication like create, telling it whether to create or update. It could be an indication of the state of the object. It could be the user who is doing the call. It's up to you to decide what that is. And on the fields, you can add either one map-only annotation, or you can add a map-onlys group, which allows you to combine several map-onlys. And in there, you say that how the copying needs to be done, how the conversion needs to be done, if the specific tag exists. And if there is a map-only or a map-onlys annotation on the field, then the field will only be copied in the case where the tag, well, one of the tags which was mentioned is listed inside the map-only annotation. And there is also the star default handling to cover other cases. Right. There are some tricks you have to apply to make sure that this always works, and specifically when handling lists, you actually have to indicate to the system what type of object is contained within the list to make sure that the conversion can be handled properly. This can be done using type conversion, and you can see in the example that you say that it has to use, for example, the filter TO list type converter, or in the example below, a read-only domain type converter. You can also define default type conversions to say, for example, have a standard conversion between a date object and a Yoda time, date time object, and then it will automatically apply certain type converters depending on the types of the objects in the two, on the fields in the two objects. These type converters, obviously, they're referenced by name, so you need to configure them somehow. I'm showing the Spring way to do the configuration. So if you're using the Spring integration, you just have to use the top line to create your JTransfo bean that can be auto-wired or wired into your other services. And then you can define your type converter. So the top one is a standard type converter which is included with JTransfo, and which means that if you have a link object in your transfer object, that will only update the links itself, but not update the fields within the list, not the fields within the linked object. The bottom one is an example of a list type converter, again using the read-only variation, and you can have some extra parameters about how to handle everything. For example, whether the list should automatically be sorted on conversion or not. Right. To make this work well with your object relational mapping tool, you can define an object finder, which means that every time that JTransfo wants to get an object to copy to, it will actually try to determine which object to copy into. And there's an interface that you can implement telling you that if this is your transfer object, that allows you to figure out what the target object is. And what you will typically do is extract the ID, do a lookup in Hibernate or whatever. And if you don't implement an object finder or your object finder that you implement that doesn't have any results, then it will simply copy into a new object. Because there's only one object finder which is defined, you know that all your linked objects will always have the same kind of behavior, because they will always be using the same object finder to find that object. So, and as I said, so the read-only domain variations of the built-in type converters, what they will actually do is when the system encounters links, that it will update the field with the link, but it will not update, it will not recursively convert the object itself. Right. There is support for inheritance, so that works. You have to, in your domain object, you just simply have to indicate what the child classes are, so that the system can figure out how to do the conversion if that is necessary. So the child classes are basically annotated as if they don't use inheritance. So, but on the parent class, you have to indicate that there are children to make sure that it can do the mapping properly. Right. So, and then there's an extra feature. This is actually quite recent within the framework, which is a convert interceptor. So each time that the JTransfo actually does a conversion from transfer to the main object or vice versa, the convert interceptor actually has a chance to do some changes before and after, very much in AOP style. This can typically be used for validations or for side effects, for example, to automatically update the last updated field, or to do, as I say, to do complex validations. Right. That's it. So you can find JTransfo online on the jtransfo.org or on the GitHub page. That's it. Are there any questions? Yes. Right, so the question is, how about performance? And the answer is yes, it is using reflection at the moment. It actually caches the combinations of transfer and domain objects to make sure that the actual lookup of how to do the conversion is only done once, only when that combination is used for the first time. But the conversion itself is using reflection, yes. Right, other questions? Yes. So the question is, isn't it odd to define the children on the parent class and not vice versa? Well, the vice versa wouldn't be necessary because on the parent you can basically, on the children you know what the parent is because you can simply see that it implements whatever. The problem is that you will typically be declaring a list of something or a link object as the parent class, which can have any of the children as child. And the system has to know that it may well encounter a different kind of object, and it may well have to copy additional fields. So that's the only solution I've found till now. I mean, if you have better ways to do it, post an issue on GitHub, and I'll be glad to look into it. Right, other questions? No? Okay, thank you very much. Have a nice evening.